Right. Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. My name is Lucy Valesky, and I'm a reporter at Missouri Business Alert. I'll be your host for today's discussion. For those of you who are new to Missouri Business Alert, we are a digital publication that provides top business news from across the state. We also host events like this one as a resource for the business community in Missouri. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll be taking a look at how farmers can find money to fund sustainable practices they might want to implement. These practices can help small farms withstand drought or other unexpected weather conditions, and sometimes help farmers save money or support the stability of food systems. Before we get into the conversation, though, I'd like to read a quick word from our sponsor of today's event, Harpo's. Discover the perfect blend of ambiance at Harpo's, where you can seamlessly transition from the classic sports bar atmosphere to an upscale cocktail experience. With the recent addition of The Landing, a versatile event space ideal for everything from birthday celebrations to corporate gatherings, Harpo's offers a historic legacy and unforgettable event experience. Remember The Landing at Harpo's for your next event. And then I will share the graphic. All right. Throughout today's conversation, we want to hear from you. If you have any questions, please leave them below in the chat of this Facebook Live. We'll be watching the chat and we'll have time to get those questions answered. For today's conversation, I am joined by Dan Downing, who is the Missouri Coordinator for Sustainable Agriculture, Research, and Education, a grant program that works to support the research and implementation of innovative agriculture practices. Dan grew up on a farm in Missouri and has served as a University of Missouri Extension Coordinator in multiple counties. Dan, thank you for taking the time to talk with me today.
Good afternoon. Glad to be here.
Excellent. So to start off, let's get a definition going. So how would you define sustainable agriculture?
Oh, how do I define sustainable agriculture? Well, in my mind, sustainable agriculture is focuses on economically sustainable, environmentally sustainable, and has to be positively contributing to the community. That also coincidentally are what we refer to as the pillars of the SARE program. And we'll come back to that a little bit later on. But, again, low impact, minimal environmental impact, and helping to derive income on a regular basis to keep people on the properties and have a decent, sustainable livelihood.
Excellent. So can you give an example of projects that might be considered sustainable?
Well, in recent years, there's been lots of focus on local food systems and urban foods and urban farming. And by the nature of the programs and just how our system has evolved, we really have two parallel types of food production systems in the U.S. We've got the commodity-driven production system, which is traded globally and food products shipped all over the world. And then we have the local food systems, which focus on much smaller production, much more localized production, much more localized consumption, and recirculating funds within the community. So to me, the local food systems movement in the whole concept is a step towards sustainable production and a sustainable society.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have any examples of those specific practices that maybe you've encountered?
Pardon me? Didn't catch that.
Do you have any examples of specific projects that you've seen farmers implement to be sustainable?
Oh yeah, we've got folks that are trying all sorts of innovative things and as well as tried and true traditional things. If you throw back to World War II, we didn't talk about truck gardening, we talked about victory gardens. And when I was a teenager, everybody was waiting in the Midwest for the first crops of the year, the first watermelons, the first sweet corn, the first tomatoes to be shipped up to central Missouri from the boot heel. They were far enough south that they're a couple weeks ahead of us, growing wise. And again, it's small scale, much smaller scale than we think of the commodity production. And there's lots and lots of those. We've got folks that are engaged in heritage breed livestock. They're doing free range poultry, free range turkeys, chickens, free range hog production instead of large scale confinement situations. We've got lots of folks now, and this is really exploding. The organic certification side of things has grown exponentially the last few years. Organic production has, and I guess I should back up just a little bit there. You asked for a definition of sustainable up front. A lot of people think of organic and sustainable and regenerative as interchangeable terminology. And there is a lot of overlap in those three definitions, but they're not exactly the same. You know, again, the programs that I work with mostly tend and lean towards sustainable practices, but not necessarily organic. And then you flip that around, and almost all of the organic practices are looking at sustainable practices, especially from an environmental standpoint. And then the regenerative agriculture, that's a relatively new term that has kind of entered the discussion coming out of, at least originally when I first encountered it, folks in the fisheries, forestry, and wildlife area that were interested in doing things like forest farming, you know, growing mushrooms and different products in forested areas.
Okay. Why would a farmer want to embrace these sustainable practices?
Well, as far as why farmers would want to embrace sustainable practices, you know, everybody likes clean air. I don't think there's anybody that doesn't appreciate clean water, scenic landscapes, and a healthy environment. And those are all reasons for people engaging in sustainable practices. Um, not here to, you know, really criticize our traditional commodity production systems, but there are aspects of everyday life that are really not sustainable that have become well established in our traditional practices. So again, flipping back to the human health aspect of things, you know, that's one of the primary reasons that the Environmental Protection Agency was created. If you look at the premise for creation of it, and some folks, you know, would say that it's overreaching and has lost its mission and purpose. Others think that it hasn't gone far enough in helping to protect the environment and human health. But those are the two basic premises for the creation of EPA, and then sustainability within the agriculture realm also lends towards that, helping protect the environment, helping protect human health, and create a better environment for all of us.
Yeah, so has the kind of event of some like more recent weather events like the drought that's happened the last couple summers, has that influenced farmers to embrace more sustainable practices, or do you just what does the trend look like there?
Well, as far as if the drought really convinces people to try more sustainable practices, it definitely has caused some folks to shift their production and look at some alternatives. But overall, you know, the droughts are a relatively short-term phenomena in the Midwest. They don't go on for years and years and years like they have in other places around the world. The one specific thing that I can really put my finger on that the drought reoccurring over the last 4 or 5 years has caused farmers to do is in grass production or forage production for livestock. Um, excuse me. Typically, when we bale hay and produce hay in the Midwest, we're talking about what is known as cool season grasses that grow in the early spring and the late fall. They kind of go dormant in the summer months when you see the brown landscape in July and early August. A lot of times that is a fescue type of grass that's gone dormant for the summer and it'll flourish again in the fall. With the droughts that we've had and the demand for hay for livestock in the winter months, a lot of our producers have begun seriously looking at our native warm season grasses and reintroducing them into their grass production rotations. I'm talking about things like a big blue stem, little blue stem, Indian grass, switchgrass, eastern gamma grass. They're very drought tolerant, and they are just the reverse of our cool season grasses. They don't grow very fast in the spring and they don't grow very fast in the fall, but in the heat of the summer, have the ability, some of them, to put roots down 3 to 4 feet deep and grow very prolifically in the drought conditions. And that is something that's very tangible and easy for livestock producers and hay producers to see and grasp, and an adaptation that is coming directly as a result of drought and climate change.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I know a lot of the cattle farmers were hit pretty hard in this most recent drought with, finding hay and feed for
Now, in the short term, most of the farmers compensate by trucking in hay from areas that had major hay production. And even here in Missouri, it wasn't a blanketed drought across the state. There were parts of the state that were very flush with the production of hay this year, and other areas where there was none. So trucking within state and even bringing stuff, forage in from out of state's pretty common anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what are some of the challenges that go along with implementing sustainable practices? So, if I'm a farmer that knows I want to do this, what are some of the challenges I would run into?
You just asked the million-dollar question to creating change in our society. You know, if you think about our commodity production system, it is built around a lot of infrastructure, both physical and conceptual infrastructure, trading and markets and what have you. And when we ask people to go to, for example, local food production, that infrastructure and the safety nets may or may not be there. And we're asking people that are farming for their livelihood, much the way that I grew up with corn, soybeans, cattle, and hogs, to do something else. We know how to do corn, soybean, cattle, and hogs. We know there's a market for it. We know how to ship it. We know how to grow it. We know how to handle it. We know how to process it. We know how to market it. If we're asking somebody to grow kale or some other crop that they're not familiar with on a mass scale, then we're playing with their livelihoods, and that's scary to people. Being here on campus, that is one of the questions that I've been asked many times by our international faculty when they come and they see acres and acres and acres of corn and soybeans. Say, why aren't people growing vegetables? Why don't they grow food here? Well, that is food, but not directly consumed by their neighbor or by themselves. So again, a long answer around to, we're dealing with the question of changing the structure. And one specific example where we have affected some change recently is we have the crop insurance program that helps with corn and soybean production in particular, guaranteeing minimum income from those if you have total crop failure, if you have, a hail damage or a drought condition or something like that. And in the past couple of years, that program has been expanded to provide insurance for specialty crop producers. So there's another term I'm throwing into the discussion that we haven't brought up yet, but specialty crops, as far as the government agencies are concerned, are primarily crops that are grown on a small scale, such as fruits, nuts, vegetables, that kind of thing, and not traded in the commodity markets worldwide is kind of a working definition of specialty crops. And there's programs now to support some specialty crop production. I mentioned the crop insurance for specialty crops. Right now, there is a call for proposals out from the Missouri Department of Agriculture for specialty crop grants. I believe it's a due date of March the 26th on it. If someone has an idea of something that they could engage in that would help specialty crop producers, whether it's new irrigation techniques, new crops, new production technologies, that's what those grants are targeted at. They're around $40,000 to $50,000 grants. They're not real big grants, but they're big enough to start making some changes.
Right. So you kind of mentioned that you have to change your infrastructure and you'll need funding to do that. So you work with the Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, or SARE. So what type of funding does your organization
Yeah.
provide farmers?
Yeah, the SARE program I mentioned earlier is built around those three pillars and um, has a variety of educational publications and services that the SARE program offers, but it does also offer grant programs. And in our case, sitting here in Missouri, we're part of the North Central region. So these are competitive grants. The funding opportunity is cyclical, comes around every year. And I'm going to get my cheat sheet here, so make sure I don't overlook them. But the SARE grants are pretty straightforward, and the most popular ones and most applicable to farmers are the farmer rancher grant proposals. Those come due in the fall of the year, sometime between mid-October and mid-December is when the applications come in, and those are currently up to $15,000 for an individual farmer who wants to explore a solution to some ongoing issue that they have on their farm or try a novel approach to something. The example that I like to give people is there's big demand in parts of the country for goat meat. So we frequently get calls, somebody saying, will you buy me a herd of goats to get me started in goat production? That's not what the SARE program is about. But if through the SARE program, um, goats have lots of issues with parasites. So if someone was interested in setting up a paddock system or a cell grazing system with a different forage or a different pasture in each one of those cells for the goats to graze on and rotate them from one cell to the next and track what that does to the parasite load. If that helps reduce the parasite load, that's the kind of on-farm research that the SARE program likes to fund. Right along with that, the SARE program doesn't like to invest in capital investments per se, buying equipment, but they will buy tools. So it's a kind of a fine line where something is a tool that's necessary to do the job and where you're investing in equipment. So anyway, that's one example. And then if you turn the volume up on the farmer rancher grant just a little bit, we've got what we call the partnership grant. And the partnership grant is up to $50,000. And in that particular granting program, it's three producers working with an agricultural advisor. The agricultural advisor could be someone like an extension agent, a BOAG teacher, somebody from the Soil and Water Conservation District office, one of the third-party contractors that does shares their expertise through NRCS programs, certified crop advisors, what have you, overseeing the project. Basically, the advisor does the administration of the grant, and the three partnering farmers compare and contrast, um, you know, practices on their farm and see what the difference is, what the results are from that. So that one is another program that's directly targeted at farmers and ranchers. I would put in a little plug here that we don't get nearly the number of applicants for that. So the chances of getting approved if you do submit one of those applications is better than it is for the farmer rancher grant. Typically in Missouri, we get 10 to 15 farmer rancher grants per year approved, and it's highly competitive. And then with the um, partnership grant, we've had a few of those approved in Missouri, but again, not nearly as competitive, not nearly the number of applicants. And there are some other grant programs offered through SARE. You want me to go ahead and talk about those, Susie?
I think we can maybe, I have a couple more questions
Okay.
to talk about the actual grant application process that we might want to get through first. But a question I had is if someone knows they want to implement sustainable practices, but they don't really know, where to implement that, how do you recommend coming up with ideas for grant proposals?
The feed broke up just a little bit. I didn't catch the first part of that, Lucy.
Okay, so if a farmer knows they want to, for like with your example, have sell goat meat locally, but they're not sure what exactly, what type of project they want to do with that. How do you recommend coming up with ideas
Okay.
for a grant proposal?
Yeah. Um, there is a group in the upper Midwest named the Michael Fields Institute that actually the SARE program has a little bit of support behind them to encourage them to work with farmers and ranchers on trying to do um, proposals, put together proposals, conceptualize their ideas, and get that on paper. Um, I'm here at the University of Missouri on campus in Columbia, and my peer down at Lincoln University is Dr. Toria Eaton. Together, we are the co-coordinators for the Missouri SARE program, and Toria and I are both able to counsel over the phone or over a Zoom meeting with people that have an idea that they would like to bring to fruition. And even if there's a draft of the proposal written, we can help review that and make some comments that we hope will improve the chances of getting that funded and do a kind of a pre-review. As state coordinators, we're considered employees, if you will, of the SARE program, so we're not eligible to apply. We can't be listed as partners on the application or the proposal, or even as a key player, but we can do some advising and consulting in the background and help out with conceptualizing it. So if again, if somebody's got an idea and they want to move forward with it, we're available to help counsel on that.
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone has any questions for the end of the live, feel free to leave those below, but we'll go through a couple more questions right now. Do you know of any other grant programs in Missouri that farmers can apply to for sustainable agriculture practices?
Yes, there are. There's several grant programs out there that are applicable to sustainable crops and livestock systems. They're not earmarked for sustainability, but they are applicable. There's a through USDA, and I need to back up and say that the SARE program is a tiny little piece of USDA, so our funding originates there, and then it comes on down through the pipeline, much like others do. But in Missouri, the Missouri Department of Agriculture has a program that is known as the Missouri Agriculture Small Business Development Authority. And they make all sorts of um, grants and loans. They have uh, in their grants area, they have grants related to biofuels, value-added products, entrepreneurial ideas and products. In the loan portfolio, they loan on alternative crops, which and enterprises, which is what we think of as non-traditional. They loan on animal waste handling systems, beginning farmer systems. They have loans for beginning farmers. They have down payment loans, which help people if they're going to a conventional lender to get together the down payment that may be required by the conventional lender, and Missouri Agribusiness Revolving Loan Program. And all of those are part of what we refer to, the acronym is MASBDA, the mouthful until you get used to it. Is again, it's the Missouri Agricultural Small Business Development Authority. And if you go to the Missouri Department of Agriculture website, you'll find it on there, and all their programs are listed there. That's one of the bigger ones available in Missouri. And then, of course, at the federal level, there's also programs through USDA, through the Farm Service Agency, through the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and we sometimes forget about USDA Rural Development. But all three of those parts of the federal government have loan programs and what have you too. There are some private foundations that fund uh, grants and loans a little bit more specific to the sustainable ag realm. Came across a couple of those the other day, and I didn't get them written down, but they're out there on the web. If you do a search on a web search for lending or financing for sustainable agriculture, they show up. So there are some out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a new audience question. Um, Here I have one. So there has been a lot of criticism on cattle farmers for the methane cattle produce. Has there been any innovation with different feeds to reduce methane for carbon offsetting with cattle?
Tough question, and I'm really not the right person to try to answer that one. I will say though that yes, there is research going on in those areas, and some of it is also tied back to pork production. I'm not trying to shift the topic here. I'm just giving an example. A few years ago, it's kind of universally accepted that elevated phosphorus levels trigger algal blooms in water bodies. And a lot of our livestock feeds have traditionally had high levels of phosphorus. So the discussion and a lot of the research in the swine industry a few years ago related to feeds was changing inputs to change outputs. So changing the phosphorus content in the feed so not as much was passed through the animal coming out the other end and impacting the environment. So yes, there's discussion and there is research going on in the livestock realm on reducing environmental impact in general, and some of it pertains to feeds and the methane production and what we can do with the methane that's produced.
Right. So there's kind of a lot of different projects going on how to reduce that output. The last audience question doesn't have too much to do with sustainable like agriculture, but it has to do with maybe the drought and maybe you have some insight. So do you kind of expect there to be another drought next summer and how will it compare to previous summers?
I have no idea what's going to happen next summer as far as weather goes. Who would have predicted that 3 days ago we would have had 83 degrees in central Missouri, and the next night we would have had highs, overnight lows in the teens and snow on the ground. So no way to predict that. But one thing is for certain is that the weather will change and that we will continue in these cycles of drought, excessive moisture, drought, excessive moisture. And that's pretty well validated by the climatologist and the National Weather Service and all of those agencies that deal with that. So in the agricultural sector and looking at sustainable ag and local production is part of the equation in being able to deal with those swings in moisture. Um, they tell us basically that it kind of summarizing it, and the climatologist would say I'm oversimplifying it, but basically they're saying we're going to have more extreme weather events. The number of them is going to increase. They will be more extreme, continue to be more extreme, and that we will have wetter winters and drier summers as part of a cycle moving forward. So again, not very specific, but in general, yes. And that's there could be some advantages to that. There are folks looking at growing crops in this area that would not grow here 5 to 10 years ago. And I have one very specific example. If we have time, I'll share it with you.
If you could do it quickly and then we'll do one
Okay.
more question
I,
and
I
we'll
I was at a conference a couple of years ago talking to some gentlemen who were older than I were from the Dakotas, and I was talking about the corn blight of the 1970s, and they looked at me like I had three heads. And when we got done talking, they said, "Oh yeah, we grow corn in the Dakotas, but we didn't 10 years ago. The climate has changed enough, and the cultivars of field corn have changed enough that they're now producing corn in the Dakotas in areas that they did not have a long enough growing season 10 years ago to grow corn there." So again, another very specific example of science changing things and the environment changing things.
yeah, absolutely. It's adaptability is going to be important kind of no matter the angle you take it at. So my last question is going to be, what is your number one piece of advice for people who are just starting to become interested in sustainable agriculture?
Hmm. Good question. Number one piece of advice is focus on some aspect of it. You know, think of the big picture, but act on some very small part of it to have an impact. It's that old joke. It may not be politically correct, but how do you need to eat an elephant? One piece at a time, one bite at a time. So if we, tackle this thing of needing local food supplies and adaptation and sustainability and start at the local level and grow up from there, I think we can have some pretty significant impacts.
Excellent. I think that's all the time we have for today, Dan, but thank you so much for sharing your perspectives with us. And thank you so much for everyone watching for tuning in as well. If you want to keep up with everything else Missouri Business Alert is doing, you can check out our daily email newsletter, The Morning Minutes. It delivers the top business news from across Missouri to your inbox Monday through Friday. You can subscribe for free at missouribusinessalert.com/subscribe. You can also keep up with us on our website, missouribusinessalert.com. Thanks again and have a wonderful weekend.